So this is The Search, a game that was developed by very talented people. And guess what? They sent me an offer to make a sponsored video about their game. Now, silly them, if they had just sent me the thing, I would have probably done it for free. But hey, I'm not complaining. So in this video, I'm going to cover my first impressions of the 2-hour preview that I got to play. And if you don't really care about my commentary, you can check out my second channel, because I'll be uploading the whole thing there soon. Also, if you don't want to get spoiled and you just want to know my opinions, you can skip to the time that's showing on screen right now, just to see my conclusions about the game. Only one more thing before we begin. This was played on PC, I think at maximum settings. All of the footage was recorded and played by yours truly. And also, the start of the preview is not the actual start of the game. Apparently the game has like 30 minutes before the things that you're about to see happen. So with that out of the way, let's just get into it. So we're like 2 seconds into the actual game, and there's already something that kinda bothered me. You can tell by the card on his hip and by his overall design that this is going to be a named protagonist instead of just a character that you create yourself. And while there's nothing wrong with it, it is a risky path to take. Because obviously if you force the player to play as someone who they don't really like, it's gonna be really difficult to take the rest of the game seriously. So at this point I was hoping that this guy turned out to be actually cool. So at this point, the gameplay actually begins, and I must say, for a few minutes, my muscle memory was all over the place. I couldn't really place where this game fell, in a Dark Souls to Lords of the Fallen scale, I suppose. But I actually reached the conclusion that this game was more Bloodborne-ish than anything else. So one of the first things that I did was to remap the healing button to triangle.
You have been designated for disassembly.
If you've played Bloodborne or any of the Souls games, you'll find these controls to be quite intuitive. One major change that I noticed right away is that instead of a light and strong attack, you have these horizontal and then vertical attacks that you can mix up.
You have been designated.
And this makes a lot of sense because in this game you will sometimes have to target specific body parts of the enemies, but we'll get into that later. The dodging in this game is also very reminiscent of Bloodborne's, where you just dash all over the place. You'll realize pretty quickly though that there's no such thing as iframes, and you will actually have to mind your distance with enemies. Next up, the game teaches you how to block, and in this game you don't really want to play passive and block all the time. Blocking consumes stamina continuously and doesn't really let you move, but it also allows you to perform a quick attack and even jump and duck. I have to say though, the jumping and ducking mechanics don't feel natural at all, and you can completely get by without using them. Only way later I would realize that some enemies have attacks that you can duck under and then punish with the kick, but there's no clear indication of which attacks can be dodged, and considering how everything in this game hits like a truck, most of the time you're just better off not trying. The next section teaches you how to switch through enemies when you lock on, and it was also here that I tried doing a dash attack for the first time, and also figured out that if you hold any of the attack buttons, you perform a charge attack. Shortly after, you come across the first operations room, and these rooms basically serve as hubs where you can level up, create new gear and stuff like that, but the first time you visit you can't really do much because your rig is not working, so you actually have to go and find a replacement. So a little bit of enemy foreshadowing, that seems to me like a mini-boss later on. Wasn't very subtle, but I liked it anyway. And now we come across the first humanoid enemy in the game, and for the first time you learn how to target specific body parts. In this particular occasion, you're only doing it so that you can hit its weak spot, but later on you will have to focus on specific parts so that you can then cut them off. This is just one of many items that you could miss if you don't pay too much attention. It's nice because they're not in really obscure places that you will never find on your own. You actually just have to look around a little. So you kill a few more enemies and you finally find a functioning core that will allow you to unlock all the options back at the hub. And for the first time you see this recurring element through the level, which is a circuit that you have to overcharge. And the basic gist of it is that you can't overcharge it and thus continue if you're not a certain power level. And this I already have a problem with, because it basically means that the game will force you to be a certain level in order to continue through some areas. You guys know me, I enjoy the challenges, and if I were to play this game a couple times, I might try to beat it at level 1. But the game literally forces you to level up, which I thought was a shame. So with that new power core, you can go back to operations now and activate the med bay. This is the place where you respawn every time you die, and also where you level up. And there's no stat leveling in the Surge. Instead, you level up your power core. And as you'll see in a minute, having more power basically allows you to have more stuff on at the same time. Being at the med bay also allows you to equip these implants, which are sort of like little add-ons that consume energy slots. They can give you little bonuses, like seeing the enemy's health bar, although the most important one, and the one you want to use all the time, are just the ones that allow you to heal. Because if you don't heal up, you'll be dead in just a couple hits. It's also at this point that you can access the gear assembly station, but to be honest, I didn't really have much to do right now, so we'll get into that later. So with the new power core, we can now overcharge this circuit and keep going. But more importantly, we can now perform finishers, and this is where the game actually gets interesting. See that weapon the enemy is carrying? Just target its arm, hit it enough times, and if you've done it right, when you perform the execution, you'll cut it right off. And there we go, we now have a new weapon. And the best part is that this is not a one-time thing. Any weapon you see a humanoid use, you can cut off and get for yourself. You can even get their armor as well, but I didn't realize that when I was playing for the first time. Also, let me use this time to show you about some elements of the HUD. This one here shows the tech scrap, which is the game's currency that you use to level up and also to upgrade some things. And on the left we have the proficiency bar, which is associated to your weapon type. The more kills you have with a weapon type, the more points you get into this bar, and gaining levels in proficiency basically means that you do a little bit more damage with that kind of weapon. If you don't want these to clog up your HUD all the time, you can go to options and manually disable them. You will also notice that during battles there's these strategic slowdowns that make combat a little easier. They're especially noticeable when you perform an execution. I didn't have much of an issue with them, but you can turn them off as well. Turning the execution setting to low only makes it activate when you get something new out of the enemy, so that's probably what I would go for. There's also another thing that I didn't notice when I was playing for the first time, and that's the way blocking works. Other than the stamina consumption, there's nothing stopping you from blocking all the time. But if you do it right before an attack, the enemy is pushed back and you have a good opening to hit him yourself. So back to the weapons, the first thing you want to do when you get a new one is to equip it and try it out. You'll notice that the light and quick weapons don't have charge attacks, and instead you have to alternate between horizontal and vertical attacks to do some combos. But the medium and especially the heavy ones can be charged, and for the combos you have to alternate between horizontal and vertical charged and uncharged attacks to mix things up. So after exploring a little, I came across another implant to equip at the medbay, and also found one of the audio logs, which is one of the ways in which you can figure out the story of the Surge.
We've had issues with Robert Weave again, this time about the exoskeleton program. He's refused to have the implant surgery. And we've explained it's hardly invasive, he even offered to double his bonus. But no, thinks management will use it to control the workforce. And he even brought up his union nonsense again.
Not long after that, I tried wearing some pieces of armor for the first time. Each piece of armor takes up power slots to equip, so if you want to wear many of them at once, you'll have to level up or allocate your power correctly. And most of the armors you'll get from enemies, but at this point of the game I still wasn't aware that you could do that. So I just kept targeting the arms of my enemies, because I noticed that way I got upgrade materials for each weapon. So after checking the corners of this area a little bit more, I found this entrance to the power plant, and while the overall level design of the build that I tried was pretty good, this area was my favorite. This felt like an important place where I could actually get something useful, but I couldn't turn on my flashlight because I hadn't acquired the parts yet. So I tried my luck trying to fight enemies in the dark, and it was really anxious. actually really enjoyed this bit, because even though I wasn't prepared for this area, the game didn't really try to hold my hand and tell me to go back. I just made the decision myself to go back and maybe try my luck with this place later. So back on the surface, I opened some pretty straightforward shortcuts back to operations, and I found a little hidden path that led me to this thing. And yeah, this mini-boss thing just completely obliterated me. However, this gives me the chance to point out another feature of the game. Very much like in Dark Souls, when you die, you leave your tech scrap on the ground, and you have a timer to pick it up. Apparently that's another thing they recycle from Lords of the Fallen. However, the timer is very generous, and every time you kill an enemy, the timer goes up a little bit, so that was never an issue at all. If anything, it was quite forgiving. So this machine kicked my ass a few more times, but I eventually managed to beat it. And honestly, the music here is so fucking cool. I really like this tense track that they put on it. After talking to the developers, I'm under the impression that this game has not so much of a focus on bosses. And while I love bosses, I think it might actually play in its favor, because I enjoy little moments like this a lot more than the boss fight that will come up later. So after that, I went back to operations to do the usual, equip new implants, level up a little, and here I was trying out this new staff weapon that I found. Pretty cool stuff. After advancing a little bit more in the area, I came across another dark tunnel, but this time I was like, what the hell, I have a light source coming from my weapon, so it can't be that bad. And hey, it turns out that this tunnel connects back to the other one. And that might just be me, but the realization that everything was interconnected was really cool, and again, I really enjoyed this part. There was also this terrible hallway full of environmental damage that you couldn't really get very far on without having to heal constantly. But I noticed that there was something at the end of the tunnel, so I felt compelled to just keep trying until I got it. And it took me a few attempts, but I finally got a new version of the weapon that we had been using for the most part so far. So for a while I kept exploring, and I came across many paths that just interconnected back and forth across the level, which wasn't even that big, but somehow managed to be really intricate. I also found one of the more aggressive humanoid enemies that was quite cool to fight against, and of course I cut his arm off to get his weapon. And up to that point, I wasn't really impressed with how the shortcut system worked. It just seemed really straightforward. Oh, this door is locked from the other side kind of thing. But then I came across this. And I realized that these boxes had been here all along and I hadn't even noticed them. It just made me feel so silly. As I said, overall, the design of the level is top notch. One of the best things, if not the best thing about this early preview build. So it was around this time that I actually wisened up and realized that you can target the other body parts to get schematics and also farm the materials that you need to create them. So I went on a killing spree and cut a lot of people in half. It was a lot of fun. And with the materials in my possession, I could actually craft the body here back at operations. And hey, I could have a flashlight on now. Great. I quickly put to use my newly crafted lantern, and I found a room that I had missed in the power plant before. Here I fought another one of those aggressive enemies, and he just fucked me up. I also think that it's pretty funny that after all of this, I still hadn't figured out that you can go to the menu and actually use up all of these items that I had been picking up that give you tech scrap. So after defeating that guy, I powered out the plant by overcharging the circuit. And on my way back outside, I was surprised by this very sneaky boss that I hadn't even noticed was there. The way it was introduced was kinda cool, and I'm gonna let you watch it for a minute before I give you my thoughts.
System check initiated. Error. Bypassing. Error. Bypassing. Bypass successful. Bringing primary weapon online. Primary weapon offline. Secondary systems operational. Evaluating tactical options. Severe threat encountered. Enforce maximum punitive measures. Rehabilitation implemented.
So the basic gist of this boss is that you have to bring up its threat meter by attacking it constantly, and then running under it so that it shoots itself with its own missiles. While the concept itself is pretty nice, the execution is kinda weak. I feel that this boss is a missed opportunity to use more mechanics that have been introduced, maybe ducking under its blades or just having an attack that you can jump over. To me, it just seemed remarkably simple. The camera didn't really pan out like it did with the mini-boss before, and even the mini-boss's music was more tense than this. Might be my personal opinion, but I just found it really conventional. Now, from what I've gathered and I've seen from the trailers, the other bosses in the game seem a lot more interesting, but I haven't played those, so I can't give you my opinion. So anyway, when you defeat this boss, the little preview build ends right there. After playing it again, I managed to equip the boss weapon that it drops. And it just seems to be a different version of the single-rigged heavy weapon that we have been using so far, only with different stats. But yeah, I didn't get to play with it because the game ended right there. And well, those were my first impressions of playing this preview build of The Surge. Now, this video didn't cover every absolute detail of it. There's some minor things that I left out that I just thought weren't too important, and some major things that I left out because they just weren't there. Like these little drone things that have appeared in some trailers. And if I had to summarize my experiences, I would say that the things that I really liked about the game were the map design, which I thought was excellent, everything related to getting gear from enemies, from chopping off their limbs to later assembling it together, it was great, and also the difficulty, which I didn't really mention during the video. The Surge has a fixed difficulty, it doesn't have an easy or a hard mode, and I have to say that at least in this preview, it just felt right. Now, some other things that are more questionable that might put some people off are the complete lack of any multiplayer. There's no PvP, co-op, or leaderboards that I know of. There's also some enemies that I found just a little bit more boring compared to the rest. And the boss in particular didn't really impress me. And the music too, I feel, was a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes it was just right, and some other times it was just too generic and didn't really add anything to it. There's also a few things that I just don't know enough about yet. Like the story. I know that the game has NPCs that you can interact and even kill. And I can see it going both ways, like it could be terrible or it could be really good, I just don't know yet. Another thing that I don't know is if later enemies will make the player exploit and make use of all the mechanics that the game presents us with. Learning how to duck under enemy attacks and then punishing them was just so much fun. I don't know why the game doesn't focus on making combat a little bit more like that. Another point of concern to me was the weapon variety. I noticed that in this 2-hour preview build there were like 3 weapons with the same moveset. So I'm really hoping that when you progress through the game, you get different kinds of weapons that you have an actual reason to use, and not just reskins of the ones you already have with slightly better stats. I know that's one of the things that would make or break the game for me. Here's hoping there's a lot of them and the game is actually great. I know that if they send me a review copy before the game comes out, I'll be happy to play it through and tell you guys what I think. But until then, this is what I got, and I hope that you enjoy watching this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.